Welcome. My name is Wendy Ford Wolfberg. I'm an ex-cultist and a longtime friend of Steve Hassan's. Some of you may be familiar with my book that's in the bookstore about recovery, and Steve, of course, has these wonderful, excellent resources here. For those of you that haven't had the pleasure of knowing Steve Hassan or working with him, he has his master's in education, and what's LMHC?
Licensed mental health counselor.
Nice. He's been involved in educating the public about mind control and destructive cults for over 26 years. A long time.
27, actually, that's old.
Yeah, okay. He actively counsels mind control victims and their families, and is a licensed mental health counselor, holding a master's degree in counseling psychology from Cambridge College. Where is Cambridge College?
Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was England.
Cambridge College. It's Cambridge University.
Okay. And he has, as we can see here behind us, written both of these wonderful resources. He's the director of the Freedom of Mind Resource Center, and that website is pretty straightforward in your yellow handout. So,
freedomofmind.com.
Thank you, freedomofmind.com. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Steve Hassan.
Thank you, everyone. And before I begin, does everybody know that I was involved with the Moonies and that I was counseled out of the Moonies and that's how I got? No. Okay, so maybe I should just begin by telling a little bit about myself, because it's very significant to my approach, which is I lived it. I grew up in New York City, and youngest of 3 kids. I was in college, and I had just broken up with a girlfriend, and 3 attractive women approached me in the student union cafeteria and invited me over for dinner. And it became a seduction and recruitment into a front group of the Moonies. And within the space of 2 weeks, I came to believe that Moon was the Messiah, that the end of the world was coming in 1977. This was 1974 when this happened. I believed in Satan. I grew up in a Jewish family and never believed in Satan before. This 3-day workshop where they installed this absolute panic fear of Satan. And dropped out of school.
The mic is not working, Steve.
The mic is not working. I just have to hold it closer. Okay, thanks, Noel. In the space of a very short period of time, I dropped out of college, quit my job, donated my bank account, believed God had summoned me to be part of the chosen group of people who were going to make the Garden of Eden on earth, that this final cataclysmic war with Satan and communism was about to take place in the next 3 years. And when I first came back from a 3-day workshop, which, by the way, they tried to pressure me to immediately go into a 7-day workshop, but I said no. When I came back and my mom and dad saw me, they said, "Your eyes look really strange. Have they given you drugs?" And I said, "I don't think so." And my mom said, "Let's go talk to the rabbi." And we went and talked to the rabbi, and he was clueless, absolutely clueless about cults, about the Moonies, about anything. And all he needed to say to me is, "Steve, I don't know what this group is, but I can assure you if a group is legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny. So don't allow yourself to be heavily pressured into making a fast commitment to something that you don't know everything about. And let's agree not to go back for the next few weeks, and let's research it." And I wouldn't be here doing this workshop about how to rescue people from destructive cults. Unfortunately, he was clueless, and unfortunately, 27 years after my exiting from the Moonies, I was in for 2.5 years, I could say that most clergy are still in that state of ignorance today. It's absolutely mind-boggling to me, despite all of the years of efforts of Wendy, of Pat Ryan, and Joe Kelly, and Herb Rosedale, and Bill and Lorna Goldberg, and many, many other people giving thousands of lectures, doing television appearance after television appearance. The state of ignorance is as high as it's ever been, in my opinion. And part of the problem is what I believe is a lack of the educational system to teach people about this subject. But certainly, I think destructive cults spending lots of money hiring people to do publicity and to do conferences. Putting out this information is definitely a piece of that, to confuse the public and such. In any case, I bowed to an altar with Moon's picture on it. I recited a pledge that I would fight with my life to die for the fatherland, which, by the way, is Korea. By the way, the Koreans are the master race in Moon's vision of reality. And he still wants to take over the world, by the way, and he owns the Washington Times and UPI. And don't get me started, because I could do the whole talk on the Moonies, but that's not why you're here today. But it's infuriating to me and sad and very scary that Moon has as much power as he has. And if you go on my website, I have a list of front organizations of his group that's 48 pages single-spaced around the world. And he's a multi-billionaire. So I'm a pretty frustrated cult activist, anti-cult activist. In any case, I fell asleep at the wheel of an MFT van. I was a fundraising captain in Baltimore, Maryland, drove into the back of a tractor-trailer truck at 80 miles an hour, broke my leg very seriously, and was in the hospital. I needed 2 operations on my leg. And during that period of time in the hospital, I was basically sleeping, which was not something I did much in the Moonies. I was sleeping an average of 3 to 4 hours a night and working 7 days a week. And I reached out to my sister Thea, who I was always very, very close with. And of all my friends and family, she was the only one who never attacked my membership in the Moonies. She basically just said, I love you, you're my brother. I miss you, I want you to be happy, are you really happy? She hated the group too, but of all my oldest sister Steffi, my parents, my friends all tried to shake me and wake me up and tell me I was brainwashed and I was in a cult, and all of those things just drove me deeper into the mindset, unfortunately. Why? Because I was programmed to believe that the closer you are to God's divine providence, more evil was going to be attacking you, and that Satan worked through the people you love the most. So I was already programmed to expect persecution, quote unquote. These are quotes, by the way, quote unquote. And so they fulfilled the prophecy of the Moon cult, and it just made me do more and more thought stopping. I remember one time where my father read in the newspaper that Moon had an M16 gun factory in South Korea, and he called me up and he said, look, there's proof, he has an M16 gun factory. What kind of Messiah has an M16 gun factory? And I was just going, crush Satan, glory to heaven, peace on earth, glory to heaven, peace on earth, crush Satan, because that's what I was trained to do. And unfortunately, no one had told my dad about thought stopping. No one could explain at that time the indoctrination processes that were done to me, and to advise him how to sidestep the indoctrination or use the indoctrination against itself. And that is kind of where I am right now, 27 years after I'd gotten out of the group. And I should say I got out because my family rescued me. It was not because I was disillusioned after that accident. But the accident allowed me to call my sister. My sister said, come and visit, I miss you, you have a nephew you haven't seen yet. I made her promise that she wouldn't tell my parents because they were Satan, and I had these fears that I was going to be kidnapped and beaten and tortured, just like the same propaganda on the Cult Awareness Network website that is against me right now. I was talking to Nancy O'Meara earlier, yet again, about why did they put up libelous things about me on their website. Of course, I know why they're doing that, but in any case, she did tell my parents. They did hire some ex-members, one of whom I had actually recruited into the Moonies. And over a period of 5 days, the first day started involuntarily, the rest was voluntary. And I should say that it wasn't voluntary because I had doubts, because I had no doubts consciously at that time. But I wanted to prove to my family that I was not brainwashed, I was not under mind control, that I knew what I was doing, And I loved them, and I really was absolutely sure that Moon was the Messiah and the divine principle was the greatest text of God's truth on earth, and I was prepared to defend it. So I agreed to these last few days of, the next few days of interaction with the ex-members, and by the fifth day, the final day where I was going to decide if I was going back or staying out, I had a snapping experience where they were showing me stuff about Moon, actually one of his speeches that he was giving at the time to some congressmen, saying that he loves Americans, he respects Americans, and he's surprised at these accusations that people think that he, a Korean, could be doing brainwashing on incredibly smart American young people. And they asked me, what did I think of that? And it was the first time in 2.5 years that I thought, what a snake. What a liar. Because I had heard him no less than 100 times talk about how superior the Koreans were, how lowly Americans were, and how our brains were dirty and he needed to heavenly brainwash us. But that one moment opened up this avalanche of stored dissonant memories. I had experienced so many things that if I had not been in a mind control environment, would have made me walk out. And I cried for hours, and what also really helped me a lot was being shown Lifton's book and the 8 criteria of mind control, of thought reform in Chinese communist systems. And I had never believed at that point that I would be spending the rest of my life helping people get out of mind control cults. But I can tell you that one of the major things that helped me was meeting with Lifton a few months after I got out. I called him up and I said, I really want to talk to you and about my experience. He said, why? And I said, well, I read this Thought Reform and Psychology book. He said, that old book? Because at the time it was 15 or 16 years old, and I said, yes, it was very pivotal in my understanding. And I met with him and I proceeded to explain the Mooney system, the 3-day workshop, the 7-day workshop, the 21-day workshop. And he said, this is like so much more sophisticated than what the Chinese were doing. And it's like a mutant hybrid of what I was studying. And he said, to be honest, I only studied it secondhand. But they did it to you and you did it to others. You should study psychology and help explain it to us. And it was like the most brilliant therapeutic reframe in history. Because for me, I went into that meeting a depressed, dejected college dropout, ex-Mooney, who was like trying to figure out what the heck do I do with the rest of my life. And this brilliant Yale psychiatrist at the time he was teaching at Yale had written 15 books or 14 books at that point, is telling me, you should explain it to us. And but again, I had no expectation at that point I would be spending the rest of my life doing anything. And one of the things that really crystallized for me that I wanted to do a lot more in this field was when Jonestown happened, which was November 18th, 1978. We're coming up on the 25th anniversary of Jonestown, by the way, in just a few weeks. 913 men, women, and children died, including a congressman. So I went back to school, I got a graduate degree, I became a licensed counselor, and I have kind of evolved as I've grown professionally and I've seen the field grow. It's gone from that emphasis on the snapping effect, and some of you may be familiar with a book called Snapping by Conway and Siegelman that kind of trumpeted, this is what we need to do, is snap people out of it. And my personal experience, which was when I snapped, it was devastating. It was like being on the top of a skyscraper and someone yanking all the floors below me, and I was falling, but I didn't know where I was going to land. And it was phobias in my head, and no one to explain what a phobia is or to explain what had happened to me. I had this intellectual paradigm of Lifton, but they were unable to walk me through the experience step by step. and was involved for a brief time doing some involuntary interventions. Some of them are legal conservatorships. At the time, for a brief time, some judges were awarding temporary custody to parents for adult children to enable them to be counseled for about a week and then come back to the court. But that was abandoned as a legal process. So for those of us who abhorred the involuntary approach, and for the record, I've never kidnapped or beaten or tortured or raped anybody, despite what Scientology and other people have said about me. And I have never, thank God, been sued or had even a civil case against me from anyone that I've ever worked with. But I went from that to a voluntary approach, and many of you maybe have heard of Combating Cult Mind Control, which I wrote in 1988, which kind of focused on a voluntary intervention type approach, where we try to get the person to another location and then lovingly, not that dissimilar to an alcohol intervention, lovingly confront the person and ask them if they would speak with me and some ex-members. And that had some good success, except the big groups caught on really fast. People like Kip McKean of the International Churches of Christ held my book up and marked me and said anyone who read this book would be kicked out of the group and go to hell, etc. And the approach has just evolved to where I feel empowering the family and empowering the friends more and more is the way to go. And rather than this kind of snapping, going after a traumatic, tumultuous, radical shift in someone's consciousness, that creating experiences where there are a lot of ahas, where there's a lot of supportive information, loving information that's done strategically over time is a much more healthy approach. It's a lot more frustrating in many cases for family and friends, because they typically want it over with. They're suffering, they're aware their loved one is in a destructive cult, they want them out. They don't want to think about another day going by that their loved one is cut off from them or is in a destructive cult. But as I've been trained more and more in counseling and family counseling and communication strategies, this is the approach that I've evolved, and I'm here to share some case examples to help you to understand more about what I'm doing, and my hope is really to encourage those of you who are here who are therapists to expand your repertoires. Those of you who are ex-members who are thinking about friends who are still in, maybe you can utilize some of the things that I'm saying. If you have a loved one or a friend who's still involved with a cult, maybe some of these ideas will be helpful too. So having said that, I want to stress that love for me is the single most important factor. Beyond all measure, and unconditional love is what I'm talking about. Not, I will love you if you leave the cult, or I will love you if you come home for my birthday, but it's loving their beingness, their essence, even though they may have a cult identity that is accusing you of beating and torturing them as a child, or saying other horrific things about you, but remembering who they were before the mind control is done to them, and loving them, and keeping your heart open, and keeping that message clear. Because if your love is conditional, or if it's even sensed as conditional, you're losing, I think, the greatest force. And indeed, what I say to all of my clients, and I say to all of you, is make your goal to empower the person to think for themselves and act independently. Don't make your goal getting them out of the cult, because it's too small a frame, and it also opens up this win-lose battle that often ensues of I need to succeed in getting you out. If you take the position of I just want you to think for yourself, and I want you to make your own decisions, and I want you to be fulfilled, and I want all of your talents and abilities to be manifested, and if you do that, I will be happy. then there's no space for that kind of win-lose, I'm right, you're wrong frame. And also, I want to say that the most powerful way to influence someone is to live it yourself and role model it. So I can't tell you how many families have come to me, and maybe the father's struggling with alcoholism or some other issue, but is unwilling or unable to get control of their life. But they're then trying to tell the person in the cult that they're not in control of their life and they need to get in control of their life. As a therapist, I say, why don't you get control of that issue and then thank your son or daughter if they were like smashing you in your face with that as an issue, and say, thank you, I did get help. And then you're role modeling, and it's so much more profound and effective in terms of then moving towards a place where you can effectively influence your loved one. So love is much more important than techniques. And what I also want to talk about is goal-oriented communications before I get into specific case studies. And that is, you really need to think ahead of time, what is your message? Who are you communicating to? And how can I say it in a way, or how can I write it in a way that's going to have maximum positive impact? And so it's a very different way of communicating than what we're used to doing with family or friends. To really think ahead of time, what is my intention? What is the message I want to get across here? And how can I say it so they'll really hear it? But it's a learnable skill, I promise you. And if you have the benefit of knowing any former members of the particular cult or situation that you're concerned about, you can ask the ex-members to help role play with you the predicted how a cult member would respond if you said it this way, if you said it that way, if you did this or you did that. Because the thing about cult mind control is it's amazingly predictable. If you know the master program, if you know what the leader's teaching, and you know the words, it's amazingly predictable. And when we're talking about strategy, if you think about any situation, whether it's tennis or chess, if you know how the other person's going to play, if you know that in advance, as long as you're creative and flexible and determined, you will figure out a way to beat them. Or at least, now I'm talking about win-lose. Whoops. Well, I do slip back and forth to I do think on some level like it is a war. Like someone you love is been taken hostage, but they don't realize it. And they need help, but they don't acknowledge that they need help yet. But, so what else do I want to say? Step one is always rapport and trust building in any communication, strategic communication. If you don't have rapport and trust, figure out what you need to do to get rapport and trust. And if you're not sure, ask the person, what would I need to say, or what do I need to do for you to be able to sit down and have talk with me, or have good feelings towards me, or depending on the situation. I'd say 9 times out of 10, the cult member says, you never read that book I asked you to read, or you never came to a lecture, or you never came to a program. And unlike what I recommended in 1988, I recommend that you get educated about what goes on in the particular cult first, but go to a program and make sure your loved one is sitting there with you and know how to utilize and make the best, take the best advantage of that situation. In my first book, I talk about focusing on the person's pre-cult self, but as my approach has evolved, I'm saying you need to do both. You need to empower the person's pre-cult self, and you need to disempower the cult identity. And this dual dissociated identity model is, you probably, for those of you who've read my books or heard me before, I mean, that's one of the keys of understanding the radical shift back and forth from the the person you knew and loved, how they're talking warmly and spontaneously to the cold, arrogant, judgmental, indoctrinated person. So rapport and trust building. The next step is gathering information, but specifically information about what your loved one is thinking, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing. I ask people, they'll come to me, a situation that's been going on for 7 years, and I ask, what is your son's typical day like? And they don't know. They have not a clue. They don't know what time the son wakes up, how many hours they spend in meditation or prayer, or what specific, how many group meetings they have a week, and you want to find all of that out. So adopting a curious yet concerned posture and just saying, help me, I want to understand you. I love you. Help me to step inside your shoes. If this is the greatest thing in the world, I have trouble accepting that, but if it's the greatest thing in the world and I love you, I really want to understand it. So teach me, and take that kind of posture with the person. And then beyond gathering information, that's the next step, is the advanced stuff, the planting seeds of doubt, the promoting freedom of mind strategies. And one of the key points for me, 2 key points that I want to mention is A, how to get around the thought stopping. As I mentioned to you earlier, when my father had the evidence that Moon had an M16 gun factory, and he thought that would be my criteria for evaluating Moon's messianic claim, and it wasn't. Lost my train of thought. Thank you. So, thank God someone's listening to me. The best way to get around it is to talk about another situation, another case example, another group that they would agree is a destructive group or a destructive mind control situation. And you're not doing it as a club to hit them over the head, but you need to convey a case example, a model of what is a destructive mind control group. And if you can find out if before they got into the cult, they used to think the Moonies were a cult, or before they got in, they thought Heaven's Gate was a cult, or if you have references where there's some friend got involved with some other cult, then you have a good case example. You can learn about that group, find the next member of that group, and then talk about that group to the person. Again, because if they don't understand the criteria of what makes up a destructive mind control group, how are you ever going to hope to get them to think that they need to reevaluate theirs? And so getting around thought stopping is a critical piece to strategic, goal-oriented communication. The other thing is I have a chapter in Releasing the Bonds on what I call my 3-step phobia intervention. And essentially what that is explaining what is a legitimate fear versus a phobia. So for example, if you are an Olympic swimmer and something happened to you where you're afraid to get in the water, that would be an example of a phobia, that you are afraid to get in the water. Whereas if you never learn how to swim and you're afraid to get in the water, then that's not a phobia, that's like smart. I actually had someone come to me and said, can you help me get rid of my fear of water? And I said, do you know how to float? No. Do you know how to tread water? No. You don't know how to swim? No. No, I will not help you get rid of your fear. Learn how to swim. Because fear is a functional emotion if there's real danger. The problem is with destructive mind control groups is they insert a false cue in people's brains, making them believe something is actually dangerous when in fact it isn't. So explaining the structure of a phobia, that people make a negative movie in their head and they say negative things in their head, an elevator, I'm gonna die, or something like that. And then they usually hold their breath or hyperventilate, and then the flood of chemicals gets released, your heart races, your mouth gets dry, your hands get cold, and you have a full-blown panic attack, and you want to avoid the stimuli. Well, the way to cure a phobia, if you understand it as a phobia, is teaching people, A, how to visualize. So if someone has an elevator phobia, getting them to be able to visualize being in an elevator, riding safely and comfortably. And as well as saying to themselves, instead of, I'm going to die in this elevator, they say, oh, nice elevator. Oh, it's just inspected in the last 6 months. And it has an emergency phone, too. And how pleasant. And I can be up 40 floors in 2 minutes instead of arriving all sweaty. What a nice thing. Anyway, positive self-talk, positive visual, and doing deep breathing with the focus on the exhale. So this is actually part of a strategic, this is part of the third step, three-stage phobia intervention. So you're explaining what a difference is between a legitimate fear and a phobia, the structure of a phobia, and the structure on how to cure a phobia. You with me so far? Mm-hmm. I know we had lunch, and I'm tired too. But please stay awake. The next step is introducing the idea that other groups put phobias in people's minds as a way of controlling them and making them dependent. Okay, so now you're taking the specific and you're generalizing it to another case example. You're sidestepping the thought stopping. And for Bible cults, I love using the Jehovah's Witnesses as an example of a destructive cult, because they're so big, they've been around for so long, and almost everyone's had their door knocked on by a Jehovah's Witness. Of course, if I was counseling a Jehovah's Witness, I'd probably use an International Church of Christ or a Way International or one of the other Bible-based groups. But the point is explaining how the same fear of an elevator can be installed in someone's head, where they actually believe if they leave the Watchtower Society, they're losing their relationship to God. That they're going to die they're going to kill themselves, they're going to become a prostitute, they're going to become a drug addict. I actually have like 4 or 5 pages of the most common phobias that I've come across in my practice. And showing the person this is a phenomenon, that people can program other people with fears. And then you kind of like line them up for the setup, and then you get to ask questions like, do you think it's possible? Do you think it's possible to leave your group for legitimate reasons? Or do you think, have you ever known anyone who's left, your organization and is happy and fulfilled? And of course, when you ask a question, leave a long silence. That's the most common error in communicating with people involved with cults, is you ask a good question, you give 3 seconds for them to answer. When they don't answer, you drop it and you go on to something else. And I say to everyone, don't do that. The goal is to get them to think. Ask a question and just shut up and wait. And for some people, just keep your second hand and be prepared for 5 minutes of silence. Even if it's a long-distance phone call that is costing you a lot of money, that's golden time. You want them to go inside and try to make sense and come up with an answer. And you want them to feel that you really care about what they're thinking, right? Back to the rapport and trust. So please, tell me, you've been in for 10 years? Have you ever had a close friend leave? You have? Well, why did they leave? 5 seconds? 10 seconds? And then if they change the subject, you go, no, I'm really curious. Did you ever get together with your friend and ask them why they were leaving? You haven't? You were friends for how long? 4 years? Huh. You ever think about them? You ever wonder, ever want to get together with them and talk with them and ask them for yourself? Right? I'm just asking questions, right? But if they were a close friend, and now you've had this whole conversation about how other cults put phobias in people's minds, this is the work. This is the giving people the empowerment and the tools to start thinking about alternatives. You know, if your alternative to taking pills and vodka and putting a bag over your head, waiting for the spaceship and the tail of the Hale-Bopp comet, if your only choice, you think, is to be on Earth as it's being utterly destroyed in Armageddon, you're going to opt for the spaceship. Those people, did you ever see the exit videos of the Heaven's Gate people? If you haven't, you should get a copy of it. They sat in front of a video camera, every single one of them, to give a farewell message. And they're saying, I'm really happy. I'm not brainwashed at all. This is the best choice that I've ever made. And I've yet to show excerpts of this tape to any cult member who's said, oh yeah, they really had their marbles. They were making a fully informed choice. Not a single client. They look at that and it's so pathetic. It's sad. It's so very sad, but they're saying we're happy. We're happy. There was this fellow who appeared right after the deaths were reported. He appeared on TV. He had been in it for 15 years. And he appeared and he said, who are we to judge? How do we know they're not in the kingdom of heaven on earth? You know, I was in it. They were not brainwashed. This was not mind control. And I looked and I saw, oh my God, this guy's going to kill himself any minute. He thinks he's going to follow his classmates. And fortunately, a producer who was interviewing him contacted me and said, we're really worried about this guy. We think he's going to kill himself. Would you talk with him? And I was like, send him to Boston. Come on. And we counseled. And fortunately, he was able to understand what mind control was and what had happened to him. But the tragedy was he had been out of the group for 7 years at that point. His family never went to get him counseling. He was unable to hold a job. He was unable to have a committed relationship. And he was totally split. Part of him felt like he was missing his classmates and missing the most important thing on earth, and part of him was trying to survive in the real world. And I said to him, Dick, why did you leave? You were in it for so long. He said, I made a promise to myself when I joined that if they ever started talking about killing themselves, I would leave. And I said, Dick, you made a really good promise to yourself. I'm really glad you honored that in yourself. So, rapport and trust building, information gathering, planting seeds of doubt, thinking about how to ask questions rather than being confrontative, rather than trying to win an argument, trying to ask the person to explain more about what their experience is. And learning about other groups are all keys to this approach. So typically I'll meet with a family for a couple of days. We'll gather a group of people together and we'll go over the 3 major social psychology experiments, the Asch conformity study, the Milgram obedience study, and the Zimbardo prison study. Are you familiar with all 3?
No.
If you're not, you should be. I write about them in my books, but there was an excellent dateline that was done that visually showed the Asch conformity study and the Milgram obedience study. Asch conformity, by the way, just to describe, they have a set-up room where people are told it's a visual perception experiment. Only everyone's in on the experiment except the person in seat 6, and they show a line. They show a line, and then they give you 3 choices of a line. And the first few rounds, everyone gives the correct answer, and then they start giving the incorrect answer. So they say, line A is really, and this is the correct answer, is really A, but they all start saying, 3. And the test is how many times will the person agree or disobey or disagree with the group. It's a peer pressure study. And basically, the numbers are somewhere around 60 to 65% of the public start giving the wrong answer. No formal mind control indoctrination, just plain peer pressure, which explains a lot about human nature. We are biosocial creatures, and we take in information through our senses, and we depend heavily on what's going on around us to know what is reality. And in the Dateline study, they show 3 people, a woman at first, who kept giving the right answers, even though you'd see her face be, a 2, but she kept giving the right answers, but she felt like she was, crazy. And then the other extreme was the guy who was giving the wrong answer confidently. 3. But I'm telling you about this because this is not only what I show to my families, but I show this to the cult member because I want to teach them about psychology. I want to teach them about how the mind works. I'm not doing, when I finally meet the client, I don't try to take anything away from them. I try to teach them what I've learned and share with them my own first-hand experience being in the Moonies. And I treat them with respect. And I encourage them to think for themselves and make up their own mind. The Milgram Obedience Study was another study that essentially people believed they were doing a memory and learning test where they believed they were giving electric shocks to some guy in another room, which in fact they weren't, but they'd have to give out some paired words that the person would supposedly have to memorize. And it was all scripted. The guy in the other room would go, "Ah! Ow! Let me out of here! Let me out of here! My heart is bothering me! Let me out of here!" And the person who was administering the shock would turn to the researcher and say, "We have to stop now." And the researcher would go, "Please continue. It's very important for you to continue. You must continue." And 60 to 65% went all the way past severe danger, XXX. The person in the other room was quiet for the last, I think, 10 shocks, presumably unconscious. So how could anyone be learning words if they're unconscious? But the authority figure saying, you must do it, please continue. And 60 to 65% of the public keep doing it. Social workers, CEOs, teachers. And that's showing conformity to an authority figure. So now we have peer group pressure conforming to an authority figure, and then we have the Zimbardo prison study where Zimbardo took very healthy Stanford undergrads. They were all tested as being smart and healthy, and they broke them into random groups of guards and prisoners, and they made a mock prison in the basement of the Stanford University psychology department. And they had to call off a 2-week experiment after 6 days because of the sadism and the craziness, and people were having nervous breakdowns in this system. And it shows, it was a 60 Minutes that was done that showed, I think, the 25th anniversary of that study or something like that. And you see one of the people who had been a prisoner, and none of the prisoners ever said, "Hey, wait a minute, it's an experiment. You're just a student, cut it out." They just believed in the reality. So I show that as well as showing the exit video of the Heaven's Gate people and showing videos of other cult members and giving an education and overcoming blocks, the most common blocks. And I think in my book, Releasing, I talk about the 10 erroneous beliefs. I don't know, how many people have read Releasing the Bonds? A lot, okay, great. Those who haven't, I really try to give you the tools of my approach in a systematic way. What to say if they say, but everything is mind control, or nothing is mind control. But he's an adult. But he says he's happy. And what my answer is, and what I suggest people's answer are to those things. So how is that as a summary? Problem. I was given a question already before. Should I answer the question before I go on? Sure, it's my thing, right? Stephen, what does one do if, while being loving and supportive, you are asked your opinion, do you think we are a cult? Okay, loaded question. Okay, my advice is to think about, you want to empower the person's real self and you want to disempower the cult self, right? So it requires, I think, a split answer. So part of me believes you're an intelligent, educated person who makes your own decisions. And you know that, and I want to trust you that you are making your own choices in this group. But the other part of me is really concerned that the group is influencing you to do X, Y, and Z. So you're not saying a yes, no, yes, it's a cult, no, it's not. But you're trying to create a dialogue in which you can have further interaction. And really, the strategic interaction approach, I haven't said is it is a fundamental assumption that I make in my work. And it comes back to my own experience when I was being helped out of the Moonies. And that is, I believe the greatest ally to the process of getting out of the group is the person themselves. Like, that is the person who has the keys to unlock the doors. They may not know they have the keys, but they have them. And because in my intervention, basically I had 4 people working on me. They were in teams of 2. And the team would come in, they'd cover a certain area, they'd go out, and then this fellow, Gary, would come in and sit down with me and he'd say, Steve, so what do you think? And I'd say, Gary, Nestor's all wet with this, and Gladys doesn't know what she's talking about this, but this other thing, that's really a significant point, you know? And then he'd go out, and then they'd come in again, and I was like teaching them how to help me get out, unconsciously. Unconsciously, I mean unconsciously. I was so intense, they told me, that they didn't think I was ever going to get out. I mean, they kept a stiff poker face that, you know, that I was going to get out, but they didn't really. They said later, they were like, I don't know about this. But on the 4th day, I mentioned that I come from a Jewish family. On the 4th day, they were making parallels between Moon and Hitler, and I said, I don't care if Moon is like Hitler. I've chosen to follow him, and I'll follow him to the end. The 4th day, this is the day before the end day. That's how fanatical I was. And then people say to me, Steve, they've been in for 10 years. How do you think? How could they ever get out? And I say to them, if I could get out, anybody could get out. Because I was so far programmed, I would have, in my opinion, I would have flown the planes into the World Trade Center. I was trained at that level. In fact, I was at a leadership meeting in the fall of 1974. Moon, off the cuffs, said, by the way, when we take power in America, we will amend the Constitution and make it a capital offense for people to have sexual relations with people other than those assigned to them by the church. If people can't keep themselves from sinning, we'll be doing a favor by taking their physical bodies away from them and sending them to the spirit world. We can save them later. And I went, yes, Father. Yes, Father. That's how far gone I was. So if I can get out, anybody can get out, in my opinion. Okay, so I think I'm going into case examples. And I was trying to think what would be some of the most useful cases to talk about. I think the first one I want to discuss is a case that involved a young man in a foreign country. I'd rather not say which one, but his mother contacted me and asked me if I thought Takar Singh was a cult leader. And I said, Takar who? And they said, Takar Singh. And I said, it's not in my database, let me do some research and I'll get back to you. This is a fellow who has a commune out in Oregon now. There's something called Kirpal Light Satsang. And I was able to locate some former members, and there's all kinds of allegations of abuse and sexual abuse, and they blindfold children, and they put earplugs in their ear for years. Supposedly going to help them get enlightened and everything. The long and the short of it was I got back to the parent and I said, yes, I think that it is a destructive cult. And she proceeded to tell me how her son has been in a mental hospital for 2 years, psychiatric facilities, on lots of medication, and They found him unconscious. He hadn't eaten and he hadn't slept, and they brought him to the hospital. They gave him medication. He was not responding. They gave him electroconvulsive shock therapy, I think 17 times, and they diagnosed him as schizophrenic, and he was basically totally dysfunctional. And she said, "Can you help my son?" And I said, "I have no idea," because I had no idea. And they flew me over, and I went and I met with this young man, and he was so medicated that I couldn't tell how much was the medication and how much was him. But we were in a fundamental dilemma, because and this is a well-to-do family who had the top psychiatrists in their country working on this case, and they were all committed to their diagnosis and their course of treatment, of course, because why would they ever admit that they made an error? And they gave, this kid has been in a psychiatric hospital for years when in fact he had a cult problem. And it was like, what do we do? Because they won't bring him down off of his meds. He's in another country. Help. And it was a dilemma. But in the strategic interaction approach, the basic process is, you think, where are we now? Where are we trying to get to? And what's missing that if we had it, we could get there? Or what's blocking that if it was in the way, we'd have to remove the block, we'll go around the block. So if the goal was to try to get an assessment of his state of consciousness, not totally drugged out, and we couldn't do it in his country, what was another option? So try to get him out of that country and try to get him here. But what are we going to do? The top psychiatrists in this country had diagnosed this case, and they were completely locked into wanting to be right. And of course, which is against the ethics of a therapist. It's always supposed to put the client's best needs, the patient's best needs over your ego and everything, and your legal situation. So I didn't know what to do, but I knew that we needed to try to do this in order to make an assessment, in order to figure out if we could be of any help. And I went to the highest ranking psychiatrist that I knew at the time, was Louis Jolyon West at UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute. And I said, I've got this case, here's what's going on, and I suspect that there was a misdiagnosis, that he wasn't schizoaffective, that he was talking to the guru, which was part of the program in the cult, and that he was following the leader's orders, which is to sleep as little as possible and eat as little as possible, which is why he passed out. And he said, well, I can't do anything unless I see him. And he flew over and he saw him, and he basically trumped their credentials and arranged to bring this young man to McLean Hospital, which is not too far from where we live. And because I had done some other cases at McLean Hospital, we brought this young man in, and we slowly reviewed his psychopharmacological situation and started slowly bringing him down, and he became more and more alert and aware. The long and the short of that intervention was, with the help of the staff there, he went off all of his meds. We flew in 2 ex-members, and we did a slow but loving exit counseling in the context of McLean Hospital. And he's doing fine. He went back home, he's an artist, he's got a life. And I wanted to start out with this case example because I want to highlight the level of ignorance in the mental health profession about this. I mean, there's such a tendency to want to misdiagnose cult-related problems as schizophrenic or schizoaffective disorder because some of the symptoms are there, and because they don't have anything to compare it with, and they don't do enough detail, in my opinion, background on what happened before and who was this person, and they were involved with a group and trying to find out what happened to them. So I wanted to mention that as a case. Any questions about that one real fast before I go on? You want to ask a quick question? Okay, we'll have time for questions and answers. Another case I wanted to present, I had a family come to me about 4 years ago now, and 2 years ago now. She had gotten involved 5 years earlier. Their daughter, they said, was engaged to be married. She was a very talented artist. She took a job at an art gallery in the Southwest, and within 2 weeks broke off her engagement to be married. And within another month, she borrowed $17,000 from her parents because she wanted to become part owners of the art gallery, she said. And within 3 months, she started accusing her father of raping her as a child. And within 5 months, cut off contact with everyone, all of her friends, all of her family. People would go to the art gallery. She'd run out the back door. They would write to her. They tried everything to contact her. So we knew where she was. But anyway, so they said, "Can you help us?" And I said, "I don't know what we're dealing with. I have not a clue. You know, it could be a false memory situation." I talked with the father, I talked with the mother, I talked with the close friends of hers, and tried to do background to try to assess what was her frame of mind before, what was her relationship like before with her dad, etc. And it sure sounded like a case that was in my ballpark. But the problem was we knew where she was, but we didn't know how to help her. I mean, I could prep the family on how to talk to her, but she won't talk with them. So what do you do then? So I looked in my database and I found that there was a former member of a different cult who was living in the same town, and she had corresponded with me many times. And I contacted this woman and said, "Would you be willing to go to the art gallery and tell me if my client's daughter is there? We'll send you a picture," which he did. And she said, "Oh, she's so darling, but she looks so anorexic. She looks with big black rings under her eyes. And can I help? Can I do anything to help?" And so we talked with the family. We flew her here. We did a prep with her. The ex-fiance flew in, and I basically trained her. And I started a process where she started going and taking classes at the art gallery and befriending this woman to find out what the heck was going on over there, because we weren't sure, was it an individual, was it a cult, was it connected to the church that he was not affiliated with, but he had been attending. And over a period of 3 months of coaching, she got this woman's trust and invited the woman to come live with her and her husband, and got her to open up about what was going on there. And it turned out this woman had been bound, beaten, like a stick on the bottom of her foot for hours at a time, raped, tortured. And this guy claimed to be a prophet of God, and was doing it to other women as well, young attractive women. In any case, this woman was able to get her to come move in with her, and I flew down. I got to do a counseling, and we had a happy ending because we were able to reunite her with her family. But it took someone living nearby who was willing to invest a lot of time and energy and a lot of coaching to affect that intervention. But that is not, believe me, that is not your typical therapy intervention where someone comes to your office. Yes, you have a question?
I'm a little blurry about who were the perpetrators. Were the owner of the gallery was the perpetrator?
Exactly. The owner of the gallery had been the perpetrator, and who was claiming to be a prophet of God. And within a space of 2 weeks convinced her that the love of her life, who she was engaged to be married, was really the wrong person for her, and that she had in fact been sexually victimized her entire life by her father, but she had forgotten all of the abuse. But he was going to fix her, and only through her submitting to his methods was she ever going to get fixed. Of course, she got worse and worse and worse. But in that case, she needed an out. She literally needed some lifeline to get out. But and I hear other families where they talk about total cutoff from the family. What do you do? Well, a non-aggressive thing to do, and what I'm recommending, and I mentioned it to a couple of people already, is set up a website, especially if you believe your loved one has computers, is on the internet. At least put up a family website and put up pictures of your family's childhood, do some open letters. I mean, at least put some help out there if your loved one can ever find that spot, that site. And it's a no-lose for those families who love someone. They're cut off. Especially, I heard someone do a presentation about children who are adults and they're in college. Almost every college now, they're on the internet. So you can make a customized website of what to say. In the case of a group that's had legal suits, you can put up testimonials of other victims, of the therapists or whatever. And again, it's not a direct way of getting the information to the person, but it's a huge step, as I see it, to that process. And I wrote about it in Releasing the Bonds, is to really cultivate people in every major city who are former members or people who are literate and understand cult mind control stuff, so that if a family knows their loved one is in San Francisco, and we have a list of 30 people in San Francisco who might potentially be willing to be trained or be used to contact their loved one, it changes the playing field. And I think that, frankly, that's what we need to do more of. We need to do more networking. We need to cultivate teams of people. And what I say to all my families, I didn't say it yet here, is the next cult member you meet on the street or in the mall or knocks on your door, that's somebody's son or daughter or sister or brother. You know, why not take a few minutes and practice some of the SIA methods? Why not ask them rapport and trust building and information gathering? In fact, that just reminded me of another quick case I want to mention. One of the most creative things that a family has ever done to rescue their loved one. Listen to this story. I'm asked to do a workshop in Germany for a hypnosis society, right? And I agreed to do it, and the administrator, his brother, was a member of a martial arts cult. But he was a doctor, and he was also a brilliant linguist and a great translator. And she arranged to hire him to translate my workshop. No joke. This actually happened. And you can talk to him and you can talk to her. And in order to prepare, he had to read my book in German, he had to read my book in English, and he sat with me as I'm teaching. It was a 3-day workshop to other mental health professionals in Germany. And we would have lunch, and he'd start asking me questions about his group. And by the end of the workshop, he was out. And for me, that was one of the most creative, and he got paid, and he did a great job of translating.
Was that a side effect, or was that the intention? Was that the...
No, it was her intention. She had read my book, and she was trying to figure out how to hook up her brother and me, and it was like...
So you had to do a whole...
I did a whole workshop with a cult member translating.
No, the workshop was before that.
The workshop was for mental health professionals to teach them my strategic
But that
approach.
was the original
But that was the
intent,
point.
and this was like a side effect. This was like a side benefit, the guy getting out.
Correct. The administrator of that society that had hired me to come do the workshop, she knew he would do a good job, and she was hoping that he'd understand the issues. And he did. He was a very, very bright man. And not only that, but just one more quick aside with that workshop, I was walking from my hotel to come over to teach the end of the beginning of the 3rd day, and who do I meet but a Jehovah's Witness that's out on the street corner trying to save my life. So, what are you doing here in Germany? Oh, I'm here teaching mental health professionals how to help people involved with different alternative religions, and And, oh, well, I'm in an alternative religion. I'm like, oh, tell me more. And how long have you been in the Watchtower Society? And it turned out he had been born into it, and his whole family was into it. And after about 5-6 minutes, he agreed to come to speak to everybody at the workshop and tell all of us about the Watchtower Society. So now I got a live cult member. It was perfect in front of all these mental health professionals, and I spent 2 days teaching them about my approaches. So we began by encouraging the mental health professionals to ask him questions and such. And I think it was about an hour, it may have been 2 hours at the most, where I was able to get him to say that if it could be proven to him that a member of the governing body, which is the top of the pyramid in the Jehovah's Witnesses, had left the group because he realized that the group wasn't following the Bible, that he would leave. Which was true. There is a man named Ray France who had left the governing body and wrote a book called Crisis of Conscience and another book called In Search of Christian Freedom. But I was able to, in front of the teaching audience, get him to say what his criteria would be to leave. And indeed, that's kind of the upper of the 3 levels. It's like, what would need to happen for you to reevaluate your commitment to this group? It's a sincere question. And the person would say, no, I would never leave. I'm happy. I'm going to be here for the rest of my life. But then you can do a series of what ifs. But what if Moon came up on stage and said, I'm taking Prozac now, and I'm no longer, delusional. I don't think I'm Christ anymore. Go home, go back to your families. What would you do? Oh, he would never do that. I'm like, okay, he would never do that, but what if he did? Would that be a criteria for you to reevaluate? Sometimes you have to go to the extreme farcical example first and then back your way in. Well, what if it could be proven to you that he had sex with more than his wives, multiple wives? Would that be your criteria? Like trying to get the person to tell you what their criteria might be. Some of the most tricky criteria are the spiritual criteria or the supernatural criteria. Because often, if you ask someone, what was it that helped you to get in or made you decide to join? I did this one case, I think I wrote about it in Releasing the Bonds, where I asked this young man, I said, Jim, what was it that made you believe that Rama was an enlightened master and you need to follow him? And he said, oh, the golden lights that was emanating from Rama. And by the way, as a therapist, I never, ever would dare to tell someone that they didn't have a spiritual experience. Like, wrong, like, not a good thing to do, ever. Anyway, how would I know? Because I'm not God. But he told me about, this golden light around Rama. And I said, but Jim, aren't you aware that in the meditation tapes, they put the suggestion out there that enlightened masters have a golden aura, and you listen to other members who told you their testimonial that they saw the golden light? And you ever consider the possibility it might have been a hypnotic effect? Oh no, it wasn't hypnosis. And I'm like, but how do you know? And he said, oh, because I saw the golden light. And he basically did the ultimate turnaround. And he said, prove it. And I was like, whoops, what did I do to myself? But again, and that's a dimension of being a counselor in this field, is thinking fast on your feet. Okay, where are we now? Where are we trying to get? What's blocking? What do I need to, what can I come up with creatively here? And this is what, literally, this was a 5-minute intervention. I said, okay, Jim, I want you to meditate the way Rama taught you to meditate right now. I want you to meditate as deep as you've ever done before. And he closed his eyes and he started meditating, and within about 30 seconds afterward I said, and I don't want you to open your eyes until you're fully ready to see an even brighter light coming from me. That's all I said. I didn't do hypnosis, I just gave him the double bind using the trance state that the cult had taught him to do, so that he was going to be stuck with his eyes closed for the rest of his life, or see a brighter light coming from me. And within 5 minutes, he went like this. wow, that's even brighter than Rama. That's it, I'm out. He said, I have my friends, we have to get them out too. And then we went to get the other people out. He went on to do a website called Rama Lama Ding Dong. Transnet.org, you can see his website. He just got all of his stuff out with Rama. Yes?
As you're mentioning these like little catch-22s, we were just talking at lunchtime about what do you say when people say to you, you know, I still feel guilty about, you know, saying things against the, you know, fill in the blank. I still, there were so many good
You mean a
things
former
that-
member?
No, the organization, the group, the cult, whatever.
But who's saying it?
An ex-member.
Okay, that's
let's
what
say.
that's what I was.
Or,
Repeat the question.
Repeat the question. So
Yeah.
give me
In
the
other
question and
words-
I'll repeat it.
Yeah, there are two things. One is, but
What do you say?
what do you say to people who say to you, well, so much good came out of this organization? So many
I say,
good
yeah,
works."
tell me what it was. Tell me what was good for you. I tell them often, repeat the question, what was good for you? If someone says that I had so many good experiences in the group, I never try to diminish any good experiences. I try to listen and amplify them. And I say to them, tell me all the good things, and you can take the good things out with you. And then I proceed to tell them that before the Moonies, I was afraid to speak in front of audiences. Literally. I learned my platform skills initially in the Moonies. I learned how to eat sushi in the Moonies, which is causing a big dent in my wallet. And as Lifton said, I learned something really valuable about mind control. Little did I know I was learning about mind control. And what do you do if an ex-member says what? That they still
The guilt.
they feel guilty.
Still feeling like they can't really speak against it because of the good things.
Oh, well, if they understand phobias, a single powerful technique, a healing technique that I teach my clients is teaching them the difference between an associated memory and a dissociated memory. Is that, do you understand what that is? No. So an associated memory is when you have it, you're back in the experience. Like if you have a memory of being in a roller coaster, you're back in the roller coaster, versus a dissociated memory where you're an observer, seeing yourself over there on a roller coaster. And because mind control, in my opinion, creates a dissociative disorder, and creates the cult self and the real self, part of the recovery, I think, is enabling the person, once they understand cults and mind control, to then go back through their entire cult experience from the moment they joined to the moment they left, and sometimes beyond that, and recode it as an observer, knowing what they know now. So that, and make that the default memory for them to remember, as opposed to associated memories, like going back into the Moonies or back into the Way or whatever. That gives the person choice, first of all. They don't get triggered, there's not as much floating. But here's the critical piece is, once they're able to see from the outside how they were manipulated in all these different situations, and I have them first do how they got in, how they got out, and 3 major experiences in between, and then they can fan out from there to fill it in. I have them go back in time and kind of reassociate into when they were in the cult, and I have them say what they would have wanted to say or act how they would have wanted to act if they knew then what they know now. You got it? So it's reassociating the resources of the here and now, going back in time and plugging it in. So to give you a personal example, I already told you about that episode where Moon talked about mass genocide, if people were having sex with people other than those by the Unification Church. You can imagine coming from a Jewish family educated about the Holocaust. I had a lot of guilt over that I had said, yes, Father, yes, Father. The truth of the matter was that when I re-visualized that, I saw myself saying what I would have wanted to say, which is, you are a lunatic. You are a genocidal maniac, cult leader. I'm out of here. Come on, everybody. He's nuts. He's going to kill people because they want to make love to their wives or husbands. Come on. He's nuts. and feel my Mooney self leave, because that would have been a legitimate reason to leave. And so, but the healing experience is that reassociation into that, and knowing I didn't have the tools then to think for myself, to make my own decisions that reflected my own values. And so by learning about the Asch conformity, the Milgram obedience, the Zimbardo, the Lifton paradigm, the Singer paradigm, etc., the ex-member needs to go back and forgive themselves. You were doing the best you could under the circumstances. They lied to you. They lied to you, they tricked you, they systematically manipulated you, they hypnotized you, they indoctrinated you. It wasn't your fault. It was not an informed choice. Forgive yourself. And then the whole phobia stuff, and someone's calling me. I see we have like 5 more minutes, so I'm going to try to do quick questions. Bob?
Steve, can you address the issue of if you're involved in an intervention and you're employing your approach, how the importance of not having the member there making contact with the group while you're...
Can I emphasize how important it is in the intervention that you want to try to disrupt the cult member from talking with people in the group?
The importance of that, or
the importance
address
of that. Well, I try the best that I can, but I can't forcibly stop someone from calling or whatever, from doing that. But the appeal that the family should make, or whoever introduces you into that setting, is that you want the person to think for themselves and to kind of role play with the person. If you did call, what would you say to them? And let me tell you what we think they're going to say to you. And they're going to tell you to run away or to stop this, or that we're bad people. And the whole intention of this meeting is to empower you to think for yourself. So give us this period of time in the future if you want to call them and ask them questions. Do it from an empowered position. By the way, I want to, if everyone doesn't know Bob Pardon and his wife Judy, we've worked together for years. Bob's a Christian minister and operates Meadowhaven, which is a support group that people can go to after Wellspring. And he's my Bible man. I do Christian groups. Yes?
I met 2 Moonies over a period of time. The first was a young man who, when I engaged him and asked him some question, it was just like he checked out.
Yeah.
Like nobody was home.
Yeah.
The next one I met.
So let me just comment. So he met someone in the Moonies and they would just check out. Well, if they just check out, what do you do? Well, I just say, are you okay? Like, you know, you seem to be a little zoned. Are you tired? Do you need a little nap?
The problem with that encounter was that as soon as I began to talk with him, the band came and picked him up. Okay, the next one I met.
Yeah, but let me just tell you, you can do like 30-second or less mini interventions by just saying, son, when was the last time you saw your mom and dad?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you like to give them a call? I'd be happy to pay for the call if you just want to do it now. I know they'd love to hear from you, son. Even if he's zoned, the real him will think for a moment of his father or mother, and that's worth doing in a little moment. I'm going to just come on because we have 2 more minutes and ask some other people.
Steve,
Yes.
Assuming that not all of
Forgive
your
me.
interactions work, what do you recommend for the parents to do if it fails?
Well, repeat for the, what do I do if the intervention doesn't work or it fails? For me, as long as the person is breathing, there are opportunities to keep going and trying to empower them. So if it fails with me in the sense that someone may be asked to meet with me and they talk with the cult and the cult says no and the person runs away, if it seems like it's impossible to try to convince the person to meet with me, then we try to go on, have them meet someone else. But for me, there's never an ending point unless the family gives up. And I don't believe the family should ever give up. You can take breaks if you're getting burned out, but I really believe in also cultivating a huge team of other family and friends who will assist you so the burden isn't all on your shoulders. And I found enormous resources in family and friends. Yes?
I have a dilemma. I've been vocal in the media about calling the group I was in a cult and saying, I've been brainwashed, and so that all that media information is there for my children to see.
Not necessarily.
It's on Google.
Oh, okay.
So how do I deal with that when I want to try to play down
The question is, because she's an ex-member who's been very vocal and has been in the media and fighting the cult and everything, I think setting up a family website is really, you can control. Well, you can't control Google, but you can control your message. And you can, it's really a matter of tailoring the message to your best estimation of what their mindset is.
I mean, in a sense, because of that, I'm entrenching they'll be entrenched when they read that stuff.
Yes and no, but I also am a big fan of when people are in colleges, for example. Now they're in an environment where they're going to be influenced by lots of other people. So for me, again, where are we now? Where are we trying to get to? I would go to the college, I would meet some psychology professors, I'd see if the administration would sponsor some talks on campus about mind control. I would see if there are any former members on campus. I would, make pictures of your kids and try to find out what classes they're in. I would not give up, because I encourage people to think, once the loved one is out, reflecting back, what would they have wanted you to do? And the bottom line is the worst, I think, from some families that have said to me, is where they feel like I should have done something and I didn't. And it's often not from lack of will or laziness, it was from lack of knowledge that there was something that could actually move the situation forward to a healthier place. And you were mentioning you were working on a book. Well, Steve Allen's son, for example, was in a cult called Love Israel, and he wrote a book for his son. It wasn't about the cult the son was in. He had a chapter on 8 other cults. And he knew his son would read it. In fact, I contributed the chapter on the Moonies. It didn't help his son get out then. His son got out a few years later. But he knew his dad loved him, because they made the effort to do this book just for him. So it helps. Yes, in the back, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Say something in response to what this young woman said. I can't see her. I was, having been in a highly controlling, destructive group myself, my parents were trying to get me out. I knew that they were against our group, that they called it a cult, but still there will be moments in a cult when you're in the down part of the cycle, you want to get out, and at those points it's very important to also see that other side, the family website, whatever that shows my parents care about me, and they will see that.
Absolutely. Just to repeat, this is a young man who was in a cult, and he was saying even though he was heavily indoctrinated against his family, there are cycles that people go through, even in a cult, where they get depressed or they get disillusioned, and at that moment they may reach out for help. And to have a website, or just to know that the family loves them and that the door is open and that there's a lifeline for them, is extraordinarily important. And I validate everything you've said, totally. And I want to thank you all for coming, and thank AFF for inviting me.